The Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly, their towering peaks wrapped in silver mist that clung like a veil to the early morning sky. At dawn, the ridges looked like ancient guardians, their shadows falling deep into valleys filled with pine and aspen, rivers carving their way through stone, and forests so thick the light struggled to break through. These woods were alive with whispers, the rustle of branches, the drip of water on moss, and the call of unseen birds. It was a place of beauty, but also of secrets, a place where men who lived in the shadows could hide their sins. On one narrow dirt road, curling along the side of a ridge, a truck groaned and rattled, its body rusted and its bed piled high with freshly cut timber. The logs slammed against one another with every rut, clanging like hollow drums. Inside the cab, the air was heavy with the smell of gasoline, cigarettes, and wet clothes. Two rough men sat in the front, their faces marked by years of hard drinking and harder living. Between them, squeezed uncomfortably on the torn vinyl seat, was a 12-year-old boy named Ethan. In Ethan's lap squirmed a tiny puppy, barely old enough to be weaned, its eyes wide and glistening with confusion. The boy held it close, as if his arms were the only barrier between the fragile creature and the world outside. He had tied a thin strip of leather around its neck, an old scrap he had found days before, shaping it into a makeshift collar. To Ethan, it was more than leather. It was a promise, whispered in silence, a vow that the puppy would not be alone as long as he could help it. The little dog whimpered and then barked, high-pitched and insistent, its sound bouncing off the metal doors of the cab. Ethan pressed his cheek to the pup's fur, whispering, "Easy now, I'm here. I've got you." He smiled faintly, a smile rare for a boy who had seen too much harshness for his age. But the sound was too much for the men. The driver slammed his palm against the wheel, his voice rough as gravel. "That mutt won't shut up. It's driving me insane." The man in the passenger seat spat out the window and growled, "It's worse than that. If some ranger or cop hears it, we're finished. Hauling stolen wood is already a noose around our necks. I'm not about to get caught because of a barking pup." Ethan tightened his arms around the little body, his voice soft, trembling. "He's just scared. He's not hurting anyone." The driver let out a low laugh, cold and bitter. "Scared or not, he's dead weight. We don't need him. Toss him and let the woods deal with it." The passenger twisted in his seat, his rough hand stretching toward Ethan. "Hand it over, boy. Don't make this harder." Ethan shrank back, pressing the puppy to his chest, eyes wide, his breath quick and shallow. He wanted to argue, to shout, to fight, but the men's faces were stone, unyielding. The truck rattled violently over another rut, the logs in the back clattering like bones, as if the forest itself was pushing the moment closer. Ethan bent his head, whispering into the puppy's ear, "I'm sorry, Rocky." He had given it a name in his heart, a name strong as the mountains outside, a name that might protect it even if he could not. The truck screeched to a halt, tires grinding mud, spraying it up onto the frozen grass at the roadside. The passenger door swung open, and a gust of cold mountain air rushed in. Before Ethan could react, the man beside him lunged forward, yanking the puppy from his arms. "No, please don't!" Ethan cried, his voice cracking, his small hands clawing at the air. The man sneered. "This thing is nothing but trouble." With a swift motion, he tossed the puppy out the door, flinging it into the wet grass by the edge of the forest. The pup yelped, hitting the ground hard, the leather collar slipping loose around its neck, glinting faintly in the gray morning light. Ethan twisted in his seat, his heart tearing in two, but the truck was already lurching forward, its engine growling, the forest swallowing the sound as they sped away. For one last instant, he caught sight of the small figure curled in the mist, shivering, lost. Then it disappeared into the silence of the trees. The forest closed around the puppy, the towering trunk standing like ancient walls, the fog sinking low to the ground. Wind moved through the branches, carrying with it the soft hiss of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. The little dog whimpered, pressing its nose to the cold ground, too small to understand why the arms that once held it were gone. Alone, trembling, it lay there, the collar loose against its neck, the last touch of kindness already fading. Yet even in that moment of despair, something stirred inside the pup. Its body ached, but its heart still beat strong, fast, defiant. The woods were vast and frightening, but they were alive, filled with secrets, and the puppy belonged to them now. The moment the truck vanished into the distance, the journey began. This was not just a story of abandonment. It was the birth of something stronger, something forged in cold air and damp earth. The puppy would stumble, fall, and rise again. It would learn the songs of the rivers, the shadows of the trees, the dangers of the predators that hunted in silence. It would learn to survive, not because the world was gentle, but because it was not. And one day, when the world spoke its name, it would not be the whimper of a lost pup that answered. It would be the steady, unbroken voice of a survivor, a name carved into the heart of the forest itself. That name was Rocky. Rocky lay still for a long while on the damp ground, his tiny body shivering in the thin mountain mist, his legs tucked tightly beneath him, as if trying to hold on to the warmth that had already vanished. The rumble of the old truck had faded beyond the ridge, swallowed by the endless forest, leaving behind only silence, heavy and suffocating. Ethan was gone. The boy's arms, that brief shelter of kindness, were no longer there. Around the pup's neck hung the scrap of leather Ethan had tied, loose now, rough against his fur, the last fragile trace of affection he had ever known. Before him stretched the vast wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. Towering pines blocked the light, their branches locked together like the beams of a cathedral ceiling. The ground was slick with moss, wet leaves, and soil heavy with moisture. The air was thick with the sour scent of decay and stone, every breath filled with the taste of cold earth. From far away came the faint trickle of a stream, joined by the lonely call of a hunting bird circling somewhere above. The forest was beautiful, but in its beauty there was terror, for it was far too large for a creature as small as the pup left trembling at its edge. Rocky tried to stand. His legs shook beneath him, claws scraping against wet leaves. He stumbled forward a few steps, then collapsed, a thin cry escaping his throat, quickly swallowed by the immensity of the woods. No one answered. No gentle voice to call his name, no soft hand to lift him. Only the wind whispering through branches and the pounding of his frightened heart. Fear pressed down on him like the weight of the mountains, but instinct whispered a different command. He lifted his head, eyes wide, wet with tears, staring into the shadows of the forest. There was danger in those shadows, and mystery, but also the only chance at life. One step, then another, shaky but determined, he began to walk into the unknown, like a child learning to walk for the first time, every movement uncertain yet driven by something stronger than fear. The forest unfolded around him. Beams of sunlight pierced the canopy in rare streaks, falling onto the damp earth in golden patches. The carpet of dead leaves beneath his paws crackled softly, as if the forest itself whispered secrets through his every step. The air was heavy with the smell of wet moss, raw wood, and stone, and each breath filled him with a strange sense of both dread and wonder. A sudden sound came from a nearby thicket. Rocky froze, ears pricked, his body rigid with fear. Then, like a spark, a gray squirrel shot out, racing across the ground and vanishing up the trunk of a tall tree. Rocky exhaled sharply, legs trembling, his chest rising and falling fast. The moment taught him something simple but brutal. The forest was filled with creatures quicker, stronger, sharper than him. He was only a leaf in a storm, small and fragile, drifting in a sea of giants. Hunger soon gnawed at him, sharp and unfamiliar. His belly ached, an emptiness that grew heavier with each step. Nose to the ground, he sniffed through the underbrush, following scents he could not yet name. A puddle of rainwater shimmered on a flat stone, and he lapped at it eagerly, the cold water soothing his dry throat. But food was harder. Leaves were bitter, sticks tasteless, and when he tried to chew one, he spat it out instantly, shuddering at the harshness. A deep, mournful hoot echoed across the valley. An owl, hidden somewhere high above, called into the dusk. Rocky hunched low, ears flat, his eyes darting to the shadows. The sweep of wings passed overhead, blotting out what little light remained. His body pressed to the ground, trembling, as the truth settled into him. He was prey, small enough to vanish in a heartbeat, fragile enough to be taken at any moment. The world had no pity, no mercy, only the division between hunter and hunted, the living and the dead. And yet in the hollow of his fear, a flicker of light remained. Rocky remembered Ethan, the warmth of his arms, the boy's whisper as he tied the leather strip around his neck. That fleeting moment of love burned like an ember against the cold night. It was enough to keep him moving. Somewhere, somehow, perhaps there was a chance to see that kindness again. The ground was rough, tangled with roots, but Rocky pressed on. His legs were sore, every step a struggle, but he did not stop. The sound of rushing water grew louder, pulling him forward until he reached the banks of a stream. White foam tumbled over rocks, the current swift and strong. Rocky bent down to drink, the cold water splashing against his face, and as he lifted his head he saw silver glimmers beneath the surface. Tiny fish darted back and forth, their scales flashing in the last light of day. Driven by instinct, Rocky pounced, paws striking the water. For a moment his heart leapt, but the fish scattered like shards of light, leaving him empty. He tried again, weaker this time, and only met the icy bite of water. Exhausted, he slumped onto the bank, chest heaving, but his eyes held a spark. He had failed, but he had learned, and somewhere in him a new determination grew. Next time, he told himself in silence, next time, he would not fail. The sun slipped behind the mountains, the sky turning from gold to deep violet. Darkness stretched across the forest, and with it came new sounds. The chirping of insects filled the air, steady and endless. The wind sighed through the trees, long and hollow, like the breath of ghosts. Rocky pressed himself against a hollow trunk, curling his body tight, hunger twisting in his stomach, eyelids heavy. He shivered violently but pressed his cheek against the leather collar, clinging to it as if it were a blanket, the last fragment of safety in a world of shadows. That first night passed slowly. The forest creaked and shifted, the air thick with cold. But Rocky endured. His eyes, though heavy with sleep and damp with dew, still glowed faintly with will. He did not know what the morning would bring, did not know if tomorrow would offer food or danger or both. All he knew was that as long as he breathed, he would rise again. In the quiet of his dreams, Ethan's voice lingered, soft and unshaken. "You're a little fighter. That's what you are." And so the night closed on Rocky's first day in the wild, not as a victim, but as a survivor, fragile yet unyielding, a heartbeat of defiance in the vast and merciless forest. Morning came slowly to the Rocky Mountains. The first light of dawn broke through the mist like a quiet promise, soft beams slipping between the trees, turning the dew on every leaf into tiny crystals that sparkled like stars fallen to the ground. Rocky stirred in the hollow trunk where he had spent the night, his body stiff and aching from the cold. He lifted his head, his breath rising in small white clouds, ears twitching at the new sounds of morning. The forest was different now. Gone was the heavy darkness of the night, replaced by a gentle chorus. Birds called from high in the canopy, their songs rising and falling like music he had never heard before. A woodpecker hammered rhythmically against a trunk in the distance. From somewhere near the stream came the splash of water and the rustle of movement. Rocky blinked, his dark eyes wide with wonder. For the first time since being thrown from the truck, the world did not feel entirely cruel. It was still vast, still intimidating, but it was also alive, filled with motion and sound. Rocky stretched his legs and stumbled out of the hollow. The ground was soft beneath his paws, wet with dew. He sniffed at the grass, nose quivering, then tilted his head toward a shaft of sunlight spilling onto the forest floor. He stepped into it cautiously, and the warmth soaked into his fur, chasing away the chill of the night. Rocky let out a small sigh, a sound that was almost relief. As he moved, he came across a patch of wildflowers, their petals trembling in the morning air. A butterfly, its wings painted in yellow and black, floated down and hovered in front of his nose. Rocky froze, eyes wide. The butterfly drifted closer, brushing against his whiskers, and Rocky sneezed, startling it into flight. He barked once, a soft, surprised bark, then watched as it danced upward and vanished into the trees. For the first time, his tail gave a small wag. Near the stream, life stirred. A family of rabbits hopped cautiously out from the underbrush, their ears twitching, noses wrinkling as they searched for food. Rocky crouched low, his eyes following every move. He did not lunge or growl. Instead, he simply watched, fascinated, his young mind recording every detail. When one rabbit raised its head and looked his way, Rocky flattened himself against the earth, heart pounding, but the rabbit only twitched and returned to grazing. Rocky stayed there for several minutes, mesmerized by their simple rhythm, before finally moving on. The stream itself glittered in the morning sun. Water rushed over stones, churning into white foam, carrying with it the smell of freshness and life. Rocky lowered his head and drank deeply, the icy water filling his belly and soothing the dryness in his throat. As he lifted his head, droplets clung to his chin and fell back into the current. Beneath the surface, he saw silver flickers darting back and forth, fish, small and quick, moving as if they were made of light. Rocky pawed at the water, missing completely, but his eyes gleamed. He barked at the fish, tail swishing, and for a moment he forgot hunger and fear. Above him, a squirrel dashed across a branch, its tail flicking like a banner. Rocky jumped, startled, then let out a series of clumsy barks. The squirrel paused, chattered angrily, and vanished into the leaves. Rocky tilted his head, ears perked, as if considering whether he had just met a friend or an enemy. Either way, the encounter left him buzzing with new energy, but hunger soon reminded him of reality. His belly growled, sharp and insistent. He sniffed the ground, searching for anything edible. Near a cluster of bushes, he found small berries, round and red. He sniffed one, nudged it with his paw, then took it gently between his teeth. The taste was sour, then bitter, and he spat it out quickly, shaking his head. But in his desperation, he tried again, this time finding one that was riper. It was tart but bearable, and he chewed slowly. It was not much, but it was something. The day grew warmer, and Rocky explored further, wandering between shafts of sunlight and shadow. Everywhere he looked, there was something new. Dragonflies skimmed the surface of the stream, their wings flashing like stained glass. Birds swooped and circled, their calls filling the sky. Even the wind itself seemed alive, carrying with it the scent of pine, wet earth, and distant snow. Rocky trotted through it all, his small paws leaving tracks in the soft soil, his tail now lifted higher than before. By afternoon, Rocky found a small clearing. Sunlight poured down freely here, warming the grass. He lay down, exhausted, and closed his eyes, letting the warmth sink deep into his bones. For a moment, in the quiet, he imagined Ethan's voice. "You're safe, little one." "I'm right here." Rocky's ears twitched, and he whimpered softly. The leather strip around his neck pressed against his fur, and he nuzzled it as if it were the boy's hand. The sky began to change again. Light shifted from gold to orange, then slowly to violet. Shadows lengthened, stretching like long fingers across the ground. Rocky's stomach growled once more, but his body was too tired to search. He curled into the grass, eyes half closed, and watched as the first stars appeared through gaps in the branches. The forest began its night chorus, crickets chirping, owls calling, the wind sighing low. Rocky trembled, the memory of last night's fear returning, but he pressed himself closer to the earth, whispering in his own way that he would endure. The day had shown him beauty, kindness hidden in the wilderness, and that was enough to keep the spark alive. As darkness fell fully, Rocky's eyelids closed. His breathing slowed, In his dreams, he saw butterflies, rabbits, and streams of silver fish, all swirling together beneath the endless sky. Somewhere, faint and distant, Ethan's voice still lingered. "You're a little fighter." "That's what you are." The night claimed him again, but this time it was different. He was not simply surviving, he was beginning to belong. The third morning broke colder than the last. The forest lay wrapped in a gray veil of mist, heavy and damp, clinging to the branches and the ground alike. Rocky stirred beneath a cluster of low shrubs where he had curled during the night. His fur was wet with dew, his body stiff, but his eyes opened wide and alert. The world around him hummed softly with hidden life, and though he was small and trembling, he was learning to listen. He shook himself, sending droplets scattering, then sniffed the air. The stream was close, its familiar voice calling to him. He padded toward it, paws crunching on damp leaves. When he reached the bank, the water sparkled faintly in the muted light. He bent down, lapping at the icy current, when something stirred above. A shadow slid across the water, silent, vast. Rocky lifted his head, ears pricked. The shadow circled back, darker this time, wings stretched wide against the morning sky. A hawk, its eyes sharp, its flight steady, scanning the ground for prey. Rocky froze, his heart hammering in his chest. Instinct screamed, though he had never known such a predator before. He crouched low, pressing his body to the earth, hoping the forest would hide him. The hawk turned, circled once more, then dove. The rush of air split the silence, the sound fierce and sudden. Rocky bolted, paws scrambling across the bank, claws slipping on wet stone. The hawk's cry pierced the air, its talons outstretched. Rocky lunged into the underbrush, branches whipping his face, but the shadow followed. He ran blindly, weaving between trunks, his breath ragged, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the forest. The hawk swooped low, wings brushing leaves, talons striking the ground where Rocky had been only a heartbeat before. He yelped, tumbled forward, and scrambled again, his small body driven by pure survival. Up ahead he saw a narrow split in the rocks, just wide enough for his body. Without thinking, he dove inside, scraping his sides against the stone, collapsing in the narrow dark. The hawk slammed against the rock with a furious cry, its wings beating the air. Dust fell from the stone walls, and Rocky cowered deeper, pressing his nose to the dirt. For long minutes the hawk circled, its shadow sweeping back and forth across the entrance, its cry sharp and hungry. Rocky held his breath, eyes wide, his small body trembling so hard the stones beneath him seemed to shake. At last, with one final scream of frustration, the hawk lifted higher and disappeared into the sky. Silence crept back in, broken only by the sound of the stream in the distance. Rocky stayed in the crack of stone for a long while, too afraid to move. His heart thudded against his ribs, his breath short and uneven. Slowly he crawled forward, nose first, testing the air. The forest looked the same as it had before, quiet, damp, indifferent. But Rocky knew it had changed for him. He had seen death in the sky, and he had survived. He stepped back into the open, his legs still shaking, but his eyes different now. There was fear, yes, but also something else. A spark, a new awareness. The forest was not just beautiful, not just filled with wonders like butterflies and rabbits. It was dangerous. It tested him, and he had endured. Hunger soon returned, twisting in his belly. He sniffed along the ground, following faint scents until he found a patch of mushrooms clinging to a rotting log. He nosed them, but the smell was strange, sharp, wrong. He turned away, trusting instinct. Further along he found berries, darker and sweeter than before. He ate a few, cautiously, filling the emptiness just enough to quiet the ache. By midday the sun broke through the mist, shafts of light piercing the canopy. Rocky lay in one patch, panting softly, his body warm again. His mind replayed the hawk's dive, the shadow, the scream of wings. He trembled each time, but with each memory came the realization that he had escaped. He had been clever, quick enough to find shelter. He was not only prey. He could learn. Later that afternoon, Rocky wandered back to the stream. He watched the fish again, silver sparks darting beneath the surface. He pawed at the water, missing as before, but this time he crouched lower, watching carefully, waiting for their rhythm. His patience grew, though he caught nothing. When at last he pulled back, dripping and empty, his tail still wagged faintly. The attempt mattered more than the failure. As the light faded, Rocky searched for shelter. He found another hollow, beneath the roots of a fallen tree, dry and narrow. He curled inside, his belly not full, his body not safe, but his spirit a little stronger. He thought again of Ethan, the boy's voice, the warmth of arms that had promised safety. That memory burned against the cold, a fragile torch. Outside, the forest shifted to night. Owls called again, their voices haunting. The wind picked up, moaning through the trees. Rocky pressed close against the earth, eyelids heavy, his breath slowing. In his dream he saw wings again, but this time they passed him by. He woke once, startled, then rested his chin on the leather strip still tied to his neck. The third night in the wild was harsh, filled with fear, but Rocky endured. And in that endurance something changed. He was no longer only the abandoned pup at the roadside. He was a survivor, learning to face a world that cared nothing for his life and to live in spite of it. When dawn came again, his eyes opened to the forest, not as a stranger, but as a pupil. The woods were cruel, but they were also teachers. Rocky was listening now. The fourth day dawned gray and heavy, the sky swollen with clouds that hung low over the mountains. The air smelled different, sharp with the promise of rain. Rocky awoke beneath the roots of the fallen tree where he had sheltered through the night. His body ached, his belly hollow, but his eyes were open and searching. He had survived 3 nights in the wilderness, each one colder and more merciless than the last. Yet with each dawn he rose again, smaller than the forest but still breathing, still walking forward. The forest was quiet in a way that unsettled him. Birds that usually called at first light were absent. The wind had died, leaving only the weight of stillness pressing down. Rocky padded out into the clearing, sniffing the air, his ears twitching. The silence was its own warning. Something was coming. By midday, the clouds had thickened into a dark ceiling. The first raindrops fell, fat and cold, splashing onto his fur. He shook them off, blinking, then looked upward as the sky split with a crack of thunder. The sound rolled across the mountains, deep and angry. Rocky lowered himself to the ground instinctively, his small body shivering. Then the storm came in earnest. Rain poured from the heavens, a relentless curtain that hammered the trees and the earth. Within moments, Rocky's fur was soaked, clinging to his thin frame, every step heavier than the last. The forest transformed around him, streams overflowing, dirt turning to mud, leaves plastered to the ground. Thunder cracked again, louder this time, and lightning tore the sky open with blinding light. Rocky ran, his paws slipping on the slick ground. He darted between trees, searching for cover. Branches whipped against his face, the taste of rainwater filling his mouth as he gasped for breath. He stumbled down a slope, tumbling into a shallow pool, water splashing high around him. He scrambled up again, coughing, and pressed forward. The storm had no mercy. Wind howled through the canopy, bending branches until they creaked and snapped. Rocky cowered beneath a bush for a moment, ears flat, eyes wide as the world crashed around him. He whimpered softly, his voice lost in the roar of rain. The leather strip around his neck, once a comfort, now hung heavy and wet, dragging against his chest. He shook, but it would not dry. Lightning struck a tree not far away, the crack splitting the air like a gunshot. The trunk exploded with sparks and splinters, flames hissing as rain drowned them almost immediately. Rocky bolted from his hiding place, terror surging through him. He darted into the open, the storm chasing him with every step. At last he found a cluster of rocks, a shallow hollow just large enough to crawl inside. He squeezed through the gap, pressing himself against the stone, his chest heaving. Rain poured just beyond the opening, waterfalls spilling from every edge of the rock. The sound was deafening, a constant drumbeat that shook the ground. Rocky curled himself tight, shivering violently. He lifted his head only once, ears twitching at the thunder that rolled overhead. His eyes reflected the flashes of lightning, each one brighter than the last. He was alone, drenched, and trembling. But he was alive. Hours passed like this, the storm unending. Hunger gnawed at him, sharper now than before. He licked at his fur, at the stone walls, tasting the rainwater that trickled down. It gave him little comfort, but it kept him from collapse. Each rumble of thunder made him flinch. Each flash made him bury his nose deeper into his paws. Still, he did not give up. When the storm finally began to weaken, the air shifted. The thunder moved further away. The rain softened from a roar to a steady drizzle. Rocky lifted his head, ears twitching at the new quiet. He stepped out from the hollow cautiously, paws sinking into the soaked earth. The forest looked different now. Trees dripped endlessly, streams had become torrents, and the air smelled of broken branches and fresh soil. Rocky stumbled forward, his legs heavy, but his eyes searching. In the wreckage of the storm, he found small treasures. A fallen branch revealed grubs wriggling beneath the bark. Rocky nosed them, then snapped one up. It was bitter, strange, but his hunger drove him to swallow. He ate another, and then another, until the edge of his emptiness dulled. It was not much, but it was survival. That evening, as the last light slipped away, the clouds broke just enough for the setting sun to spill across the mountains. The world glowed gold and orange, the wet forest shining like it had been polished clean. Rocky stood on a rock, his fur still damp, his body weary, and stared into the distance. His tail twitched once, faint but steady. He had endured the storm. He had not been crushed by it. The memory of Ethan whispered in his mind again, the boy's voice soft. "You're a little fighter." "Yes," he thought, pressing his chin to the wet leather collar. "I am." That night, Rocky found shelter beneath another fallen tree. He curled into the dry leaves, exhaustion pulling him into sleep. In his dreams, thunder still rolled, lightning still flashed, but this time he did not cower. This time he stood tall, his small body unbroken. And when the dawn came again, he opened his eyes to a forest still dripping, still wild, but also full of promise. The storm had not taken him. It had shaped him. Rocky's journey has only just begun. Watch part 2 and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter.